Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. Leading up to the vote on October 4th, the hype that was being presented in support of that measure, that it was somehow the answer to our economic ailments, obviously in the events over the last few weeks have demonstrated we have much more deep-seated, broad-based problems. And this hearing, I think, is finally giving some voice to that, particularly from Ms. Stevens. Again, thank you for your testimony. Dr. Bernstein, I wanted to focus a bit on the state fiscal relief issue, which you talked about. The governor of Connecticut, where I come from, just announced a special session of the legislature in the next few weeks to talk about $300 million in spending reductions, deficit reduction. Governor Duval Patrick up the road in Massachusetts has announced $1 billion of deficit reduction. And the feeling from most people in those states is that really this is just the first round of deficit reduction, that there's actually going to be even harder choices being made. You talked about in your testimony the impact of this trend, that it would, quote, deepen the negative cycle. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more about how that aggravates a recession.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The states have to balance their budgets, as you well know. And so at a time of economic distress, when their tax revenues are constrained by the diminished consumption that Mr. Blackwell mentioned, by lower property taxes, lower sales taxes, lower income taxes, the only way they can do so is by, they have three channels. One is to tap rainy day funds, and they're doing that. The other two are to raise taxes or to cut services, meaning directly cut services to publicly provided services to their citizens, typically in the form of lower public employment. So that deepens the economic cycle that Ron and others have talked about. That's precisely the opposite kinds of interventions you'd like to see. I'll just note on top of that that the other dimension, there's a credit crunch out there, as we all know, and the other dimension of that is that this has significantly raised the cost of borrowing for states. And even though they have sterling borrowing records, very rarely default, they're facing much higher interest rates on their bond issues, and this too is leading to cutbacks. I'll give you one example from a new study by John Irons and Ethan Pollock at EPI. The Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority recently postponed plans for a $2.2 billion bond sale to expand the terminals at Dulles and Reagan National, foregone infrastructure projects which have so far been estimated to total $100 billion, resulting in more unemployment, less demand for goods and services, and less overall economic activity. That is going on in at least 30 states at this point, those types of reductions.
So in 2001, after 9/11, there was an infusion to states, which your testimony mentioned. Again, your comment was that in retrospect, it appears that it probably got there a little too late. And I guess, you know, sitting here on October 23rd, we passed a stimulus measure on September 26th, which did have an infusion to the states. Obviously, we've lost a month. If this initiative doesn't move forward till after a new president is sworn in, we're talking January. I guess, you know, seeing states already having to move now to address these problems, I guess, I mean, time is of the essence.
I believe it was not. I don't think it was 2001. It was 2003. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. You're right. The sooner the better, particularly from the perspective of states.
And I guess when you mentioned the infrastructure piece as well, I mean, the time frame, even for some of the stuff that's right on the shelf and ready to move, is 30 to 90 days. So every sort of delay that Washington, you know, experiences is just going to keep pushing back the anti-recessionary benefit of these kinds of ideas.
Right. As Ron Blackwell described, there's a vicious cycle. And as employment falters and as assets depreciate, households with less income, they consume less, the economy faces that much more negative downward pressure.
I hope the administration, who came in here with great urgency last September, is listening. I yield back.
Thank you. Sarbanes.